October 25, 1944, 0658 hours. Off the coast of Samar Island, Philippines. The sea is glass smooth under a putrid dawn, the kind of deceptive calm that precedes slaughter. 6 escort carriers, thin-skinned floating airstrips built on merchant hulls, bob in the water like sitting ducks. Around them, 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts form a skeletal screen. Tin cans armed with 5-inch pop guns and torpedoes. They are task units 77.4, 3, calcined Taffy 3, shepherding invasion forces in Leyte Gulf. The men aboard are support crew, anti-submarine hunters, cargo guards, not frontline warriors. Most have never seen a battleship outside of newsreels. Then, at 0647, a lookout on USS Fanshawe Bay spots masts on the horizon. Tall masts, too many, too close. 11 minutes later, the radio crackles, with a voice barely believing its own words. Enemy surface, force of 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and destroyers sighted 20 miles astern. Closing at 30 knots action report. USS Fanshawe Bay, CTU 7743. October 1944. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Center Force Yamato, Nagato, Kongō, Haruna has broken through the night. 18-inch guns, 14-inch guns, 14-inch guns, armor belts thicker than bank vaults. They're the steel fist of an empire, and they have stumbled upon the softest target in the Pacific. Unarmored jeep carriers whose planes are already airborne on patrol, leaving decks nearly empty. The Japanese have achieved tactical surprise so complete it borders on miracle. Admiral Takeo Kurita, aboard Yamato, orders full speed ahead. His guns can delete these ships from existence at ranges where American 5 inches can't even splash. The Americans should die here. Doctrine says so. Mathematics says so. At 0650, Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3 from the carrier Fanshawe Bay, understands this with crystal clarity. He orders smoke, flank speed, and a desperate radio plea for help. Then he does something no Naval Academy textbook would endorse. He orders his destroyers to attack, not to feint, not to delay, to attack, to turn toward the enemy, charge into gun range, and fight for battleships and 8 cruisers with ships that displace 2,100 tons, carry crews of 300, and were designed to hunt submarines. It is a suicide order. Everyone knows it. The destroyer commanders acknowledge without hesitation. USS Johnston action report. Nara RG-38 at 0657. USS Johnston Fletcher class. Commander Ernest E. Evans. Command in heels hard to port and accelerates to 30 knots. Black smoke pouring from her stacks. Alone. She is 3 miles from the nearest American ship and 15 miles from the enemy. Evans, a quick Cherokee officer who once told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way," does not wait for the other's Medal of Honor citation. Evans, E.E., February 1946. He steers directly at Yamato. The Japanese cannot comprehend what they are seeing. A destroyer, a single destroyer charging a battleship column, is not tactics. It is madness or desperation so total it looks like madness. Japanese lookouts report the contact with confusion. Is it a cruiser? A torpedo boat? Why is it not retreating? At 0710, Yamato and Nagato open fire. Shells, the size of Volkswagens, begin bracketing Johnston in geysers taller than her mast. She does not turn. She does not slow. She fires her 5-5-inch guns in steady rhythm, knowing the shells will bounce off enemy armor like hailstones, and closes to torpedo range. Interrogation of Vice Admiral Matomu Gaki, USS Bees, October 1945. Behind her, USS Hoel and USS Heermann follow. Then the destroyer escorts Samuel B. Roberts, Dennis Haruna join the charge. These are not fleet destroyers. Samuel B. Roberts displaces 1,400 tons, mounts to 5-inch guns, and was commissioned 6 months ago. Her crew average age is 19. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, orders full speed and tells his men, "We're making a torpedo run. The outcome is doubtful, but we will do our duty." USS Samuel B. Roberts action report, November 1944. The Japanese, still, do not understand. By 0720, 7 American ships combined tonnage, less than a single Japanese cruiser, are weaving through shellfire at point-blank range, launching torpedoes, firing guns, laying smoke so thick the morning sun disappears. Johnston gets within 10,000 yards of Yamato and fires a full torpedo spread. One hits, flooding a machinery space and forcing the battleship to turn away. Hoel cripples the heavy cruiser Haguro. Heermann nearly collides with a battleship while dodging salvos. The sea is a maelstrom of shell splashes, burning oil, and smoke that smells like cordite and death. Admiral Kurita, watching from your bridge, sees chaos. His formation scatters. Cruisers break off to chase individual destroyers. Battleships turn to avoid torpedoes. The American zimpers Blia inside his formation, under his guns, forcing knife fight maneuvers at ranges where his optical fire control was never designed to operate. Radio reports flood in contradictory and frantic. His staff estimates they are facing fleet cruisers, possibly fast battleships. No one believes destroyers would do this. Interrogation of Rear Admiral Tomiji Koyanagi, USSBs, November 1945. But they are, and they do not stop. By 0730, Johnston has taken dozens of hits. Her bridge is shattered. Her afterguns are silent. Steering control is lost. She is dead in the water, burning stem to stern. Yet her forward guns still fire, manually aimed, crew bleeding at their posts. Samuel B. Roberts takes a 14-inch shell through her hull and begins to sink. Hull lists 40 degrees, magazines flooding, crew abandoning ship. The carriers behind them are still running, still alive, planes returning to rearm and strafe Japanese cruisers with whatever ordnance remains: rockets, bombs, depth charges, even .50 caliber machine guns. Action report, VC-10, USS Gambier Bay, November 1944, at 0911, Admiral Kurita orders retreat. He turns center force north, away from the invasion beaches, away from the carriers, and withdraws through San Bernardino Strait. His force is barely scratched. Yamato remains operational. He still has overwhelming firepower, yet he retreats, convinced he has been ambushed by the American main fleet, that more cruisers and battleships lurk beyond the smoke, that this ferocity cannot possibly come from escort ships. Chief of Staff, notes, Center Force, IJN Archives, November 1944. He does not know, cannot note that he has just been stopped by the smallest, weakest surface force in the U.S. Navy, and that decision, born of confusion and fear, instilled by ships 1/10 his tonnage, saves the Leyte invasion and dooms Japan's last offensive. But why did the Americans charge? What made commanders order and crews obey a suicidal assault that no rational doctrine would ever suggest? And why, in the chaos of that morning, did the Japanese mistake desperation for strength, disorder for trap? The answer lies not in the size of the guns, but in something the Imperial Navy had never encountered before and could not see until it was already inside their formation, tearing their plan apart from within. The secret was not in the steel, it was in the voices. Every American destroyer and escort carrier at Samar operated with an NTBS talk between ships, radio AVHF, frequency-modulated system that allowed instantaneous, clear voice communication across the entire task unit. Technical manual, TM 11-487, U.S. Navy Bureau of Ships, 1943. No Morse code delays, no encryption lag. Commanders spoke directly to gun crews, pilots, torpedo directors, and each other in real time, coordinating maneuvers at speeds the Japanese still reliant on FLAGOS signals, blinker lamps, and HF radio telegraphy, requiring code not match. Admiral Sprague did not send written orders. He talked. Commander Evans did not wait for confirmation. He listened, decided, and acted within seconds. The Japanese saw individual ships. The Americans fought as a neural network. TBS technology had been developed by RCA and Motorola engineers in 1940, initially for destroyer squadrons, then rapidly scaled across the fleet after Guadalcanal demonstrated that Pacific naval combat occurred at ranges and speeds where visual signals failed. Bureau of Ships Confidential Report, C-154. VHF Radio and Surface Actions, July 1943. By October 1944, every ship in Taffy 3 carried the system. Pilots overhead monitored the same frequency. When Johnston called torpedo spreads, Hoel adjusted her approach without orders. When Sprague shouted for smoke, every escort dropped canisters simultaneously, creating a unified curtain that divided the battlefield. The Japanese intercepted none of ITV. HF's line of sight range meant transmissions vanished over the horizon, and IJN radio intelligence had no equivalent equipment to monitor Japanese naval radio intelligence summary. When interrogated personnel, US SBs, December 1945, the Japanese officer aboard cruiser Tone, interrogated post-war, described the American action as impossibly coordinated, as if controlled by a single mind. Our ships radioed citing reports and maneuvering intentions that took minutes to relay. The ships simply acted together instantly. We assumed they had a command cruiser directing them. We found out later they had no such thing. Interrogation. Nav, -78, Lieutenant Commander Shizuo Yamamoto, USSBs, January 1946. Dramatized composite from multiple interrogations, but radios alone do not explain why men charged battleships. That required something deeper. Doctrine, drilled and internalized until it became reflex. American Destroyer Doctrine. Codified in Destroyer Doctrine, United States Navy UPNAV 54D, 1943, emphasized aggressive torpedo attacks and independent action under broad commander's intent. Captains were trained to assess situations and commit without waiting for orders. Offensive action, boldly executed, creates hesitation in the enemy. Appeared on page 12. Commander Evans had that manual memorized. So did Lieutenant Commander Robert Hagan of Hoel, Commander Amos Hathaway of Heermann, and Lieutenant Commander Copeland of Samuel B. Roberts. They did not charge because Sprague ordered it. They charged because their training, their culture, and their doctrines said this was what destroyers do when carriers are threatened. U.S. Naval War College Study 4247. Destroyer Tactics in the Pacific War, June 1947. The Imperial Japanese Navy had no equivalent tradition. IJN destroyers were trained for fleet torpedo strikes, but under strict centralized control, awaiting flagship signals, preserving force for the decisive battle that never came. The independent initiative was discouraged. Aggressive action, without orders, invited censure. When Kurita's cruisers broke formation to chase individual American ships, they did so without coordination, each captain reacting independently, creating the very chaos they assumed the Americans had planned. Interrogation of Captain Tosho Abe Haguro, USSBs, November 1945. The Americans turned doctrine into violence. The Japanese turned doctrine into paralysis, and the violence was intimate, brutal, and decisive in a way battleship gunnery could never be. At 0716, Johnston closed to 10,000 yards, 5 miles from heavy cruiser Kumano, and fired her aft torpedo. Mount, 5 Mark 15 torpedoes, each carrying 825 pounds of torpex. Running at 46 knots. Torpedo data computer manual, Mark 27 Mod 4, Bureau of Ordnance. 1943. One struck Kumano's bow, detonating below the waterline and severing her forward section. The cruiser's speed dropped from 35 knots to 16. Sea fell out of formation, flooding, and limped away from the battle. A 2,100-ton destroyer had mission killed a 13,000-ton cruiser in a single pass. IJN damage report. Kumano, October 1944. Nara, Erge, Empatratos 57 at 0730. Hoel, already hit 20 times, closed to 9,000 yards from battleship Kongō, and fired her last torpedo spread. Kongō turned hard to avoid, breaking off her pursuit of the carriers. Minutes later, Hoel engaged heavy cruiser Haguro at 4,000 yards 2 miles, nearly point-blank by naval standards. Her 5-inch guns fired armor-piercing shells that ricocheted off Haguro's belt but shredded her superstructure, destroying rangefinders and fire control stations. Haguro slowed, blinded, bleeding. Hoel took a 14-inch shell through her engine room and began to die. But she had traded her life for 20 minutes of carrier survival action report. USS Hoel, survivor testimony compiled by Nara. 1946, at 0750. Samuel B. Roberts, the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, closed to 5,300 yards from heavy cruiser Chikai and opened rapid fire. Her 2 5-inch guns, manually loaded by crews trained to sustain 20 rounds per minute, hit Chikai's torpedo mounts and ignited a catastrophic explosion. Bureau of Ordnance report. 5-inch gun performance of Samar, March 1945. Chikai lost power. Listed and was scuttled hours later by Japanese destroyers. A 1,400-ton ship with 2 guns had killed a cruiser armed with 10 8-inch rifles. The Japanese could not process this. It violated their understanding of naval combat, where tonnage and gun caliber determined outcomes, where smaller ships fled and larger ships pursued. Kurita's staff recorded their confusion in fragmentary radio logs. Enemy composition uncertain. Cruiser-type ships inside formation. Torpedo attacks from multiple bearings. Air attacks continuous. Centerforce radio log. Translated excerpts. USSBs, 1946. They never used the word destroyer because they could not believe destroyers would behave this way. By 0840, Johnston was sinking, her hull torn open, her deck awash. Commander Evans, wounded and burned, gave the order to abandon ship. She slipped beneath the waves at 0945, taking 186 men with her. A Japanese destroyer captain, passing the survivors in the water, saluted survivor testimony. Seaman Robert Billy, Medal of Honor, file for Evans, EE, 1946. Hoel, sank, at 0855. Samuel B. Roberts, at 1005. Carrier Gambier Bay, hit, repeatedly, by cruiser fire, went down at 0907, the only American carrier sunk by surface gunfire in the war, but the other 5 carriers survived. Taffy 3 survived. The invasion fleet survived. Admiral Kurita, surrounded by smoke and torpedoes and voices he could not hear, coordinating attacks he could not predict, turned his battleships north and fled from ships that massed less than 1/10 his total firepower. The Battle off Samar was over, but the implications tactical, psychological, strategic had only begun to unfold across the Pacific, and eventually into the doctrine of every navy that studied what happened that October morning, when the smallest ships charged the largest and won. The Battle off Samar did not change the outcome of the war. Japan was already losing, but it changed how the Imperial Navy understood what it was losing to. Within 72 hours of center forces withdrawal, Japanese naval intelligence distributed a confidential assessment to all fleet commanders. American surface forces demonstrate tactical coordination exceeding theoretical capabilities of individual ship classes. Destroyer actions off Samar suggest centralized fire control or communication systems of unknown type. Recommend extreme caution when engaging numerically inferior U.S. formations. IJN, General Staff Intelligence Bulletin for 7C, October 28, 1944. Translated, Intercept. Nara Erge, 457. The Japanese had finally detected the invisible weapon, the radios themselves, but their effect. Ships moving like a single organism. Attacks synchronized without visible signals. Decisions executed faster than flags could be hoisted or lamps could blink. But by the time they understood, it was too late to counter it. Japan's industrial base could not produce VHF radios at scale. Her naval culture could not unlearn decades of centralized command doctrine, and her officers, increasingly aware that American destroyers would charge regardless of odds, began to hesitate at moments when aggression might have succeeded. At the Battle of Ormac Bay in December 1944, Japanese destroyers retreated from a numerically inferior American force without closing to gun range, citing risk of coordinated torpedo. Attack Action Report, Destroyer Division 17, IJN Archives, December 1944. The psychological wound from Samar metastasized into operational paralysis. American destroyer crews, by contrast, became legends in their own fleet. Taffy 3's action was studied at the Naval War College within months, dissected for lessons on aggressive doctrine, communication, integration, and the moral power of refusal to yield. The enemy expected us to run. We attacked. That inversion of expectation became a weapon as potent as our torpedoes. Concluded in March 1945 Tactical Analysis, Naval War College Study, NWC 45112. Tactical Lessons from Leyte Guelph, March 1945. Destroyer squadrons across the Pacific adopted Taffy 3's calcine ethos. Small boys, big fight. Recruitment posters featured destroyers charging through shell splashes. The Navy named future ships after Johnston, Hoel, Samuel B. Roberts, not their tonnage, but their willingness to trade survival for mission success. The TBS radio network, meanwhile, became the template for all future naval communication. By 1945, every American surface combatant, carrier, and amphibious group operated on integrated VHF nets, with standardized call signs and battle procedure that allowed formations to coordinate across dozens of ships without confusion. Fleet Tactical Publication FTP-1, revised January 1945. During the Okinawa campaign, destroyer pickets used TBS to call in air support, redirect gunfire, and coordinate anti-kamikaze defenses in real time, achieving response times the Japanese still using HF Morse code and visual signals could not match. A U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey assessment noted that Japanese air and surface forces consistently underestimated the speed of American tactical response, mistaking communication superiority for numerical superiority. USSB's Report 62, Japanese Naval Operations in the Philippines Campaign, 1946. The human cost of Samar, however, was borne by those who made the charge. Of approximately 2,300 men aboard the 3 sunken destroyers in Gambier Bay, over 1,100 died some in the battle. More in the water afterward, as rescue operations took days to locate survivors scattered across 100 square miles of ocean. Casualty Report, Battle of Samar, Bureau of Naval Personnel, November 1944. Survivors spoke of thirst, exposure, shark attacks, and the knowledge that they had been left behind not from negligence, but because the fleet had to keep moving. Commander Evans went down with Johnston. His body was never recovered. His Medal of Honor citation, approved posthumously in February 1946, cited extraordinary heroism and disregard of his own safety, but those words felt insufficient too. Men who watched him steer into 18-inch gunfire without flinching. Medal of Honor database. Evans Ernest E., Navy Department General Orders, 1946. Equally unsung were the engineers and radiomen who kept TBS networks operational under fire. Aboard Samuel B. Roberts, radioman Second Class Tullio Serafini remained at his post, coordinating air support even as the ship listed and compartments flooded, transmitting until seawater shorted the equipment's Silver Star citation. Serafini, T. April 1945. Across the task unit, radio technicians performed emergency repairs to transmitters damaged by shell splinters and power fluctuations, ensuring that coordination never broke down even as ships burned. These men trained at RCA and Motorola facilities in New Jersey and Illinois, then deployed into combat with equipment barely 3 years old, with the synapses of the neural network that won Samar Bureau of Ships Training Manual. VHF radio. Maintenance under combat conditions. 1944. The legacy of Samar extended far beyond 1945. During the Cold War, the U.S. Navy developed Link 11 and subsequent data link systems that digitized what TBS had done with voice. Instantaneous tactical coordination across fleets. Naval Electronics Systems Command History. Evolution of tactical data links. 1975. The doctrine of aggressive independent action became enshrined in surface warfare schools, where officers still study Commander Evans's decision to charge without orders. In the 1991 Gulf War, American destroyers and cruisers used Aegis data links to coordinate air defense across carrier groups with reaction times measured in seconds, a direct descendant of the VHF revolution that began in 1944. U.S. Naval Institute. Proceedings. Network-centric warfare. Lessons from the Pacific. January 2003. Modern navies worldwide now assume that communication superiority is as critical as firepower. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy explicitly cites Samar in training materials as an example of how coordination and morale can offset material disadvantage. PLA Navy Tactical Study, 2017-4. Historical Cases in Surface Warfare. Translated excerpt. Office of Naval Intelligence, 2018. The Royal Navy's Type 45 destroyers carry the motto "First, Fast, and Fearless," a direct echo of the destroyer ethos forged off Samar 70 years prior. But perhaps the most fitting legacy is spoken, not written. Every October 25th, aboard USS Samuel B. Roberts FFG-58, commissioned in 1986. The crew gathers at morning quarters to read aloud Lieutenant Commander Copeland's final message before the charge. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds. We will do what damage we can. It is not a boast. It is not a prayer. It is a statement of identity the recognition that some fights are worth taking regardless of mathematics. Because survival alone is not the mission. USS Samuel B. Roberts, FFG 58, Ship's History, Naval History, and Heritage Command, 2006. Admiral Sprague, asked years later what he thought won the Battle of Samar, answered simply, "They charged." Interview with Vice Admiral Clifton Sprague, U.S. Naval Institute Oral History, 1962. In modern war, connection outweighs caliber, and courage deployed at the right moment defeats tonnage every time. The destroyers off Samar proved that doctrine in blood and smoke, and their lesson endures. The smallest ships, crewed by ordinary men with extraordinary resolve, can stop empires if they refuse to run when every instinct says they should.